Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker for this luncheon. So I'd like to bring up to the stage Cadet 4th Class Lauren Humphreys to introduce our keynote speaker.
Good afternoon. Today I have the pleasure of introducing you to today's Luncheon keynote speaker, Mr. Chris Rice. As previously mentioned, he is a Senior Vice President of AT&T's Domain 2.0 Design and Architecture. This is a position he has held since 2016. He is in charge of a team that is in charge of the functionality of AT&T's global network infrastructure and network cloud. Chris Rice currently holds 60 patents and is a recipient of AT&T's Distinguished Scientist Award. Now, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Chris Rice.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all very much for having me here. I appreciate it. I get to walk up to Peter Gunn. I'm old enough to remember what that song actually is. Hey, I'm going to talk to you all today about kind of the journey that AT&T went on. You know, we had really good success in building our network, world-class network, 5.9 reliability. But what was happening was there was a lot more demand for our services than, quite frankly, we could affordably keep up with in a hardware path. So I'm going to talk about what our journey into software really looked like, what some of those challenges were, what we did to basically attack those challenges, what we saw as benefits, hopefully you can learn from some of that, and some of the work that we did in this area. So let me go ahead and start. So this was our challenge, right? That our hardware-centric path was basically unsustainable. We were very, and still are, very, very good at what I'll call rip and replace hardware installs. We're maybe one of the world's best at doing anything like that. But the problem was the best you can do with that is keep up with some kind of linear demand. The growth of our services was dramatically increasing. I'll show a slide in a little bit what that looks like and talk about the numbers associated with it. But we couldn't keep up with the hardware approach cost effectively. So we said, look, we're going to have to take a different path. Here's an example of just like one example of why we had to take a different path. What's happened with the data, right? So since 2007, growth of data on our mobile network has increased 360,000%. Right, so I'll just say that again in case you guys think I messed up on the slide or something. It's grown since 2007, 360,000%. And here's why. I mean, this is an example. Obviously, it's not this alone, but it's just representative of what's happened. Originally, we started out in the early days of texting. It was great. You could text. This is phenomenal, right? Companies were built on it, like Twitter. And someone said, hey, if I can text words, I should be able to text a picture. Well, that increased the need for data by about 10 to 20x. Say, hey, you know, if I can do pictures and text, I should be able to put them together as frames and I can create a video. Well, that's another 10x when we decided to start doing that. And then someone said, hey, you know what? I'm interested in augmented virtual reality. And that's about a 250x, right? So when we're talking about 5G and its ability to handle augmented and virtual reality, that's about a 250x increase. And if you think that's early days, let me give you an example. And this will also be representative of what some of the rest of my talk is going to be about. You see a little picture over there, and it's a roller coaster. You say, why the heck is there a roller coaster on a communication slide? So Six Flags, I think it's about a year and a half ago now, created a VR roller coaster. And so your experience on that roller coaster changes based on what they program into those goggles. And for any folks here who had young kids and went to Disney World, and there was the greatest roller coaster in the world that they had to go on 3 years ago, that now there's like, it looks barren, there's no one in line, and you got to go wait in that long line for the next greatest roller coaster, right? You're really happy about this, and if you're building those roller coasters and you're putting the capital in to go build them, you love this idea because this is essentially software defining your roller coaster. You don't have to go build a new physical roller coaster to change the experience, right? And if you want to share that experience, you're talking about a gigabyte for 1 minute of virtual reality. So tremendous increase in data to be able to keep up with these kind of demands. Another big challenge for us is that there are going to be a lot more things that attach themselves to our network. It's no longer just, phones. It's no longer people. It's things. It's the Internet of Things, IoT, right? They're more smart devices. In fact, in the exhibit area, you can go see the AT&T drone. That's a smart device. A car is now a smart device. There are a lot of smart devices that are connecting to this. Look at the increase in devices. 4.5 billion, 30 billion, right? The original communication network was built to be stateful, to have connections because people are going to be on them for a long time. A vending machine is not on your network for a long time, nor does it want to be. So there's different challenges. There's different challenges in terms of data. There's different challenges in terms of the number of devices connecting to it. And we realized that we were going to have to do something different than we had before. We were going to have to set a goal. And who was our president of our technology organization, who is now our CEO, John Donovan, decided in 2015 to make that goal public. We all loved that. So in 2015, we said, hey, you know what? We're going to do 5% of our network in SDN. And remember, we have a really big network, and it was the first year, and 5% might sound like a lot, but for those of us who were part of it, that was a really big deal. The next year said, hey, we're going to do 30%. And we did 34. And the next year we said, hey, we're going to do 50%, and we did 55. And then this year we said we'd do 65, and we did just 65. And so let me tell you why, and then we said we'll do 75% by 2020. So let me tell you why that matters, is that there's really three things that go into making up a goal like this. First is a technology goal. What can I actually virtualize? What am I able to do? And then, for the finance people in the room, right, there's a capital budget that you have, which is essentially your opportunity space. What can I go put in? Because there's nothing cheaper than a sunk cost. If it's already in place and it's already working, there's nothing cheaper than a sunk cost. You just don't go do technology for technology's sake. And then lastly, what's the ability of the factory to deliver this? So all three of those things are mapped, and then you decide, what can I go do? Right, and so we did that back in 2015 and said, hey, by 2020, based on what our 5-year, 6-year plan looks like, this is what we ought to be able to do. And it's funny, when you make a goal public, it actually comes true, right? People are very incented to make that come true. But we said, hey, if we're going to do this, right, how are we going to go do this? What becomes more important to us now than it ever was before? And those are some key capabilities, technical capabilities, software and analytics. And so I want to talk about software and analytics, and this is just a representative, like finance people in the room. This is not, an absolute direction. This is just representative. We said, hey, we're going to have to start off with open interfaces, software defining what we're doing. And I'm going to talk about a link of a chain. And what I want to get to is the end here, where it's hyper-automation or automation associated with that. You cannot get to hyper-automation. That's where essentially it's an autonomous network that's healing itself. You cannot get to that without starting with software virtualization and open interfaces. Because without open interfaces, you can't collect the data that you need. That has to be available to you whenever you need it. It can't be a big effort to go grab that data or get it from a specific system or a proprietary system. You need to then put an analytics and automation platform in place that allows you to kind of move down that link of that chain toward machine learning, AI, hyper-automation. So we had mapped all this out. We said, hey, look, these are the capabilities we're going to need to get to the cost curves that we want to be able to do as we roll this out, and with speed. The other thing is that we don't spend as much time talking about is flexibility and speed associated with this, the ability to change the network as needed to meet different demands. So we said, hey, we got to create a plan. If we're going to do this, we need a plan. We got to be able to follow a plan, and it's got to start with the skills pivot for people. We've got to equip our people to be able to run the network of the future. right? They're really good at running our network today. They're really great people. They were super smart people when we hired them. Let's make sure we give them an opportunity to stay with us as we create this new network. Hardware layer, well, thanks to folks like, Intel, the cloud folks, and everyone else, that's pretty much commoditized. It's a server layer. We were able to go leverage that. We didn't have to do a lot of work there, but there was a lot of work to do in this next layer, the technology layer there, right? We knew if we were going to do this, it wasn't going to be enough for AT&T to do it alone. We wouldn't get the scale we needed. We had to bring the rest of the ecosystem with us. That's where the software defined, that's where open source comes in. I'll talk about its importance, and I'll also talk about what I mean by network function virtualization and white box, and how those really matter. And again, that's to get to the speed, the flexibility, the real-time agility, both for our own infrastructure as well as our customers. So I want to talk about the skills pivot. I'm going to go through each of these, talk about what we did and where our journey was. So we said, hey, this is going to be important for us. We've got to have a top-down approach. I shouldn't say that. We had to have a top-down agreement that this was important, and we had to get the highest folks in the company to agree to this. Then we said, for us to do this, we're going to have to work with our human resources folks. We're going to have to work with what we call AT&T University, who actually then does the work with online universities and different colleges and universities within the United States. And it's probably not enough just for the technical folks to go through some kind of pivot. The business folks are going to have to go through that as well. That was something that kind of came later, but it became more and more apparent as we did this. We were going to have to retire roles that had been around a long, long time inside of AT&T and redefine those roles and redefine what new capabilities we would need in these new roles and how people would get there. Think of it as a ladder, right? If you're here and you want to get to here, how many rungs do you have to hit? How long do you have to spend? What kind of capabilities do you need to get there, right? And so we introduced a whole new learning framework, and I know that sounds easy to say there, but that was a very, very big deal for us. We totally changed the way that we did our HR processes, the way we did training and everything else to make folks ready for this next generation network that we were going to build. And so what were some of the key components associated with that? I'm not going to drain all these. I'll let you look at some of these, but I think there's some big ones that I want to hit a little bit, right? Number one is offer employee support, right? It was really important that we were able to tell an employee, him or her, this is what's happening with your role. This is how many of these folks we have today. This is how many we're likely to need in the future, right? These are the paths that are the next rung on the ladder for you and other things, which direction to go, right? We also then, I'm going to go down the side over here, establish what we call collaboration zones. So think of those as cohorts. How can people who want to take this training do it together and feel like they're part of a cohort, feel like they're part of a team that's going through the same process? And again, we had to drive an employee-driven culture. So I'm sure everyone in this room has that training that you have to do every year that is not necessarily something that you're all jazzed up about doing in the very beginning of the year, right? Necessary, but maybe not the most exciting thing. It was really important for leadership to describe this training as different, right? And the way I described it was, hey, if someone would have come to you your freshman year and said, hey, I'm going to pay for your next few years of college, you'd be really, really happy. And that's essentially what we were doing. We were retraining these folks to be not just more valuable, not just more important to AT&T, but more valuable and more important in the industry. And they understood, they knew it, and they were willing to put the time and effort in to kind of go make that happen for their own careers. And again, one I already hit on was we had to have the highest level of the folks, CEO on down, on board to go do this. Without that, it would have never happened. We wouldn't have made the right investments. It would not have been the kind of program that we needed to make it successful. So what have we done? Because this has been in place for a while. And this number changes year to year, but somewhere between 50 and 60% of our folks are involved in doing this. And I'll come back because someone always asks, well, why isn't it 100%? I'll come back why it's not 100%. The folks who do this training are 50% likely to get hired in these new jobs, and there's always more than 2 people applying for a job at AT&T, so that's a really good thing. We have very specific guidelines in HR. These folks are identified as folks who've actually gone through skill pivot training now. And about 1,000 of those folks essentially were promoted in 2018. there was, that number again fluctuates each year to year, but every year you have a crop of new folks who are going through this and new openings inside AT&T to make this happen, right? And so the question will be, hey, why is that not 100%? Well, look, there's some folks that aren't going to do it. Maybe they're in a certain stage in their career, they're happy if, hey, if there's, only a certain number of these jobs and it's going to be a few less in a year, I feel comfortable with that, it's not a big deal, I'm ready for retirement. Or they basically say, hey, I just don't want to do it, I'm not interested. Or they maybe have already pivoted, like you've hired people who are going to be at that next level for you. So that's really why that's not 100%. We actually have and 55, 57%, very good number, but that's why it's not even higher. So then let me talk about the technology piece. So obviously if you have your people ready, you got to make sure the technology's there for them to deliver on top of it, right? So what did we do in the technology area? Well, number one is we became a very, very big proponent of open source. And I'll talk about why that is. And, I think it was probably maybe 10 years ago, you could not use open source inside AT&T. You had to get an exception, what's called a TSS exception, to be able to use open source. We are now one of the major contributors to open source, right? Winning awards for different ones that we've launched and helped become successful. And so what was part of that pivot for us? Well, part of it was, again, the recognition that if we were going to go through this transformation for our own company, it wasn't enough just for us to go do it. We had to bring an ecosystem with it, a vendor ecosystem, as well, quite frankly, as our peers within that ecosystem to go make that happen. It had to be something we all did together to move together, right? And the benefits are there. The benefits of open source are, look, we have a lot more people working on one particular area that are of common interest to them. It's like, getting R&D on like so many cents on the dollar. The other thing is you build some kind of agnostic tooling that everyone is able to use and then kind of slightly modify as they bring in. Nothing proprietary or specific. And then you can actually fix issues yourself as opposed to kind of everybody has to get on the call, we got to get the vendor on the call, we got to get the subcontractor, the vendor on the call, yeah, they can make that change, oh, that's got to ripple up, it's got to go through the build process. You can actually go and make changes yourself and then upstream them, right? That is a very, very, very big speed and flexibility improvement for the way you roll things out. And quite frankly, it puts our operations folks and our service designers in the driver's seat. They're able to actually have much more control over what they're able to do in open source than they would if they were going to use proprietary systems. There are challenges associated with open source, right? I certainly don't want to go through and not talk about the challenges associated with open source. It's very hard to get a community to agree on a set of coding standards. What is really important to one company and another company can vary. And that's quite frankly why it's really important that you do this in particular venues where they've gone through this before. Almost everything we've done has been within the Linux Foundation itself. There's a reason for that. It's that they run open source very, very well. They're a high quality professional organization and people recognize that. The other thing is you have to get your chief security office on board, right? Open source is a worldwide phenomenon. There will be people from different countries who will contribute to this. Right? And the first reaction is, hey, no way we're using that. But I tell you, I think if you were, a black hat and you were trying to subvert something, you would probably say, you know what? I'd rather go work for a small little company that supplies a whole bunch of other companies and no one's ever going to look at my code. That's much easier than this code that I put in open source is in source code, obviously source version. It is time-stamped, it is dated, it is peer-reviewed. It is actually looked at the project lead review and then go through code scans. And quite frankly, if anything's found, you're excised from the community and there's a lot of public shame associated with it. That's why you very, very rarely hear anything about that. So this whole idea of transparency, right, in many eyes actually improves security. Right? That's maybe a little bit hard for people to understand at first, but if you actually walk through that path, I think they'll get on board. The other thing is, hey, how much effort do I put into this? Am I going to be a leader? Am I just participating? Am I just going to take? That's a big, big question to decide, right? And if it's super important to you, you've got to take a leadership role, right? Lee Iacocca, lead, follow, or get out of the way, right? It's really important in some areas to lead. Some areas it might be okay to follow, right? And then the other thing is you're going to spend more time with your peer organizations and your vendors, getting them on board, getting them aligned with this vision, right? It's great once that happens because then you've really galvanized a community, right? That old, norming, forming, storming, performing, right? That's really important, but there is some effort associated with making that happen. Here's an example of what we did. We created something called an open network automation platform. We donated the seed code to that first. You can see there are a number of suppliers that are a part of it. The folks on the right-hand side who are service providers represent about 72% of the worldwide mobile subs who are a part of this. Again, there's about 5 billion worldwide mobile subs, so that's like 3.6 billion, right? So this is the first time that I know of that any platform has garnered that kind of support. It continues to grow today, and I think everybody in the community, the important part of this is everybody in the community is seeing the benefit associated with it. This is an example of, again, an area of leadership for us. So that was the automation platform. This is a cloud itself. We are a platinum member of and on the board of OpenStack. Very important for us. We use public cloud, but for a lot of the network things we need, where there's network performance, we use our own cloud. That's an OpenStack cloud. We have put very specific capabilities in there. We have lead areas. This is an example of Airship. Right? What else would you use to deliver a cloud network? You'd obviously use an Airship. There's a lot of frustrated marketing folks who are engineers. But my point with this is that, quite frankly, I joke about that, but some of our highest, AT&T does these surveys, some of our highest employee satisfaction are folks who are working these areas because it gives them an opportunity for leadership, it gives them a chance for public recognition, besides the fact that they know they're delivering for the company. So I think it can be a net positive there as well. So I also want to talk a little bit about something that, quite frankly, came later in our journey. Right? At first, we kind of left the structure roughly the way it was. We had done all these things, and we weren't quite getting all the benefit that we could have. We got a lot of the benefit, right? I'm certainly not going to say we didn't get benefit, but we didn't get all we could have. Right? And so we said, hey, look, is this an opportunity for us to kind of drive to a more DevOps organization? There are a lot of things that are done DevOps today. Most of those are kind of really small. So in other words, if you build a web application and you own all that web application, it's relatively easy to go do DevOps. If you have a service that you're doing inside a large service provider like AT&T that touches all these other different systems, maybe not so easy to go do that, but we had to go define what DevOps would look for that. And this is the theory of DevOps, this beautiful picture here that provides transparency, restores services faster, accelerates releases, right? It's mathematically the infinity symbol. What could be better than this, right? This is the beautiful theory of DevOps. DevOps looks a little bit more like this, right? Which is, hey, I got these 3 different sets of folks coming together. They all have unique needs. I'm expecting you to automate this. I'm expecting you to automate this. I'm expecting you to automate this. Hey, I got these old systems. I got the OSS and BSS. I've got production validation testing, end-to-end testing, brownfield services, costs, right? All these things are things that are pushing back on this DevOps idea. But if you can get this in place, if you go through that path to make it happen, there's some benefits to this. Those benefits are about 44% faster delivery time, right? You get more innovation, again, more employee satisfaction, improved application security, respond faster to business requirements. The one I'm going to concentrate is the one on the right. I guess we all signed up for this when we decided to get a technical degree. Only 1 out of the 6 business people will be happy with all the things you saw on the left, right? You just got to live with that, I guess. But there's also barriers to DevOps. And again, I'm not going to drain all of these, right? But these are things you have to have a plan for. These are things you have to go through very methodically to make sure that when this delivers, it delivers appropriately inside the organization. The one I'm going to hit on is culture. That was the biggest one, right? Bill and I were talking a little bit about this beforehand. I'm a big fan of John Wooden's Pyramid of Success. Those of you who don't know John Wooden, he was a really great basketball coach at one point in time. He's also a great leader. But in his Pyramid for Success, essentially he talks about if you really want to be at the top of the pyramid, which is a winning team, a championship team, there are a lot of things you got to get right first. And there's a pyramid. There are different layers you have to go. One is hard work. One is teamwork, right? One is collaboration. One is empathy for your folks. So you can't get to the top of that pyramid without going through that, right? The analogy I like to use with my folks is we're all wearing the same jersey. Different numbers, but they're all wearing the same color jersey. No doubt about which goal we're defending, no doubt about who we should pass to, no doubt about what basket we should shoot at, right? Getting that culture, getting that team in place, making sure that everyone either succeeds or everyone fails is key, right? Number one. The other one is budget, right? It's like you will have to spend some amount of money to make this happen. You will have to spend time on the platform. There are different numbers that the experts who write these books say, somewhere between 15 and 20% spent on platform. That means it's not being delivered to direct to business needs. You've got to be comfortable with that. The folks have to be comfortable with that. Now the good news is you drive down test time when you do this. The good news is you can actually deliver faster, so it more than makes up for that. But you've got to make sure that the folks understand the need for that. And again, the other one is executive support. This will not happen unless people see the need for this and believe in it. We were fortunate to have a leader who did and helped make all this happen. So there's a lot of things that are written, a lot of books written on DevOps, a lot of articles written on DevOps, and they all talk about, flow, feedback, frequent experiments, talk about loosely coupled architectures, all of these things that can help with DevOps. But I've personally narrowed it down to some of the easiest specific areas, right? Number one is that, same shirt, same team, different number, bring your best self to this team, which is common goals and objectives, right? They've got to be measurable, they've got to be consistent, everybody has to feel like they're in the game, right? Everybody has a chance to be heard, right? Organizational awareness, besides your team, who else is involved, how are they involved, are you satisfying those needs? And then lastly, and most importantly, trust, right? Very easy to lose, hard to build, right? But it's really the foundation for success. And it's really that organizational structure that helps drive that trust that's so important to make this successful. So lastly, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the things that this has enabled us to do. What are some of the benefits we've seen as a result of this transformation that we've gone through? Here's an example. So we obviously buy a whole bunch of equipment to put in our network. There are opportunities now with things that are going on in the industry, with merchant silicon, with, quite frankly, an ODM ecosystem that has been built up over a period of time. Things like open compute, where specific reference designs are put out in the open that other people can copy, to basically deliver some of our own equipment. Now, we used to be in that business, we got out of that business, and we're still not in the business of building the equipment, but quite frankly, when we get the equipment in today, we spend a lot of time with our specific vendors to make sure it works. This is actually taking it to that next level. We actually go work with literally the people who are building the silicon, who are building the reference designs, understand what those needs are, and build this. And now, the one area that we've been public about this in, we're using it in a number of areas. One area we've been public about is in our cell site routers. We'll be using like tens of thousands over the next year, right? And significant cost savings associated with that. And again, flexibility savings associated with some of the capabilities we'll need, the data that we'll collect, and our ability to automate that. Right? I don't want to miss those things. Those are very important to us. There's like just one example, large number of dollars saved there. The folks in legal wouldn't let me tell you what those numbers were. Another one is a mobility management network. This is in our 4G network today. There's a couple of erratas here. I apologize. It shouldn't say V-mobility. That was just a hangover, and it shouldn't say proprietary x86. It should just say proprietary hardware. But this is the physical network function that we used to use versus the virtual function that we use today, and the speed with which we can scale it, the speed with which we can bring it online, the speed with which we can automate updates, right? And the cost associated with doing that on our cloud. That's what AIC is. That should say cloud hardware. Right? We are seeing, again, legal folks wouldn't let me talk about the specific numbers, but we're seeing numbers at or greater than what I showed on the DevOps slide, right? Well over 40% improvement associated with doing this, both in delivery time and cost to go deliver. Last thing I want to talk about is artificial intelligence, AI, and how this applies, because if we're going to get to hyper-automation, AI is very important. Also, you really can't do a technical talk today without having an AI slide, right? But this is the way we look at it. And I think that, if you take a look at this slide and you take a look at the matrix there, it's really the bottom right one, right, that Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and all these other folks argue about, right? When we get to the without humans and adaptive learning, right? And that is a place to understand when that will happen, how it will happen, make sure it happens in an ethical way. But there are a lot of things that can be done today, right? Whether you're building a network or whether you're building any system in terms of automation that don't even touch that side, right? But this is a framework that we use for how we look at it. One is the whole first row is rule-based, hardwired, right? Assisting humans, right? Hey, make sure you don't do this. Same every time, right? Automation, I'm gonna go do this because every time this happens, this is what we do. We're comfortable enough, we're gonna go let that happen, but it's all rule-based, right? The next line is where you get into machine learning, so you augment intelligence. You might wanna say, hey, while I'd normally recommend this, it's Mother's Day, not a good idea to go make that change, or big storm coming on the East Coast, let's not go make that change there, right? And then again, the autonomous intelligence is where, hey, I see there's a storm coming, I know it's Mother's Day, I'm not gonna go do this, but that happens in an automated way. I will tell you that the folks in operations and anyone who's doing operations has to be so comfortable to get to that last bottom right area that that's gonna be a ways off, right? It's a great thing to talk about, it's a great goal, but that's gonna be a ways off. But there's a lot that artificial intelligence can bring to us in this area, right? That is still way beneficial in terms of delivery time, flexibility, improvement, that we're not even necessarily talking about that bottom right area. So let me just kind of quick go some of the takeaways that hopefully you got from this. Number one is, hey, when we did our shift to software-defined networking, we were able to deliver at better economics, at better speeds, with better flexibility. That's documented across several different cases for us. It's documented across our own infrastructure. It's documented across our enterprise business. It's documented across our consumer business. We believe strongly in open source. We believe in the power of a community. We believe that drives quality, speed, and savings, and quite frankly, aligns an ecosystem. Very, very important to align that ecosystem to make this transition that we're going through. The people who are going to be involved in this, that shift for them and what it means to them, that's the place to start first. That's really, really important. Without making that shift, without getting them on board, this cannot be successful. And then lastly, again, we came a little bit late to this, the organizational structure around DevOps will lead to better product focus and faster delivery. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I'll entertain any questions that you all might have. Thank you. I don't know if they're mic runners or... A lot of anticipation building for this question, no pressure.
Thank you. Is this on? Okay, thank you. Question for you, sir. Open source. This is a cyber summit.
Yeah.
What does AT&T do to make sure that the open source code that you deliver, the application, you've made sure on the day of delivery, it is absolutely free of any and all known, keyword is known, vulnerabilities?
Yeah, so in case folks couldn't hear that, it's like, hey, you're using open source, what do you do to make sure that it's secure, doesn't have any known vulnerabilities in it? So number one, there's what the community does and there's what we do. So let me talk about the community first, right? So I happen to be on the Linux Foundation board. This is an area that I'm personally passionate about, that I've driven some additional things to happen inside the Linux Foundation. So obviously, we have what we call coding standards. There's badging associated with coding, so that coders who've been in the community for a fairly long time, who are known good coders, who have contributed, are badged. So you have an idea of which ones are kind of what I'll call different quality levels, if you will, who contribute. That's number one. Number two is, and this is going to be a broad net that I'm going to answer your question around. Number two is, we also have done very specific scanning of the code. And again, I talked about the peer review and PTLs and everything else, so, and obviously it's delivered in source form. But we do code scanning inside the community itself, so that happens. And then when it's brought inside AT&T, we do yet another set of scanning in our own areas and what we do there. So, you know, in terms of the code that we get and the reviews that it get and the quality, in the lack of, let's call it malicious behavior associated with it, very comfortable with what we do, very comfortable with what happens in the community. I think that area of badging is an important area. I think we'll see more and more of that. It's something that we started driving in the effort that we did, but I think it's an important area as well. So hopefully that answers the question. Right here. Yeah, so the question was around supply chain risk. In fact, I was talking to Bill about that too before I came up. You know, one of the things this has allowed us to do in supply chain is actually, it lowers the barrier to be a supplier at AT&T. So, you know, to be a supplier at AT&T, you know, maybe 5-10 years ago, it's a pretty high bar, right? You know, do you understand scale? Do you understand quality? Do you understand 5.9's performance? I mean, we put folks through the ringer, right? The good news was when you came out, as long as you came out healthy, you were really healthy, and you could go you could go supply a lot of other folks, right? Because of the process we went through. This time now, if you think about it, it's like, hey, we're building our own hardware platform. You don't have to worry about backplane, thermal design, any of that other stuff. That hardware platform's ours. That's our risk. We'll take care of that. We're building our own automation platform. You don't have to worry about that. We don't need an EMS or an NMS or anything like that, automation platform. You basically have to supply a high quality, highly resilient, highly reliable application. And now that is, you know, that's still work to go do. But with a lot of what's happened in the web scale, there are a lot of people who know how to do that today. And so the way to be a supplier at AT&T, or the ability to be a supplier at AT&T, that barrier is actually lower, right? It's still a high barrier. A lot of them will tell you it's still a high barrier, but it's actually lower. So it's actually improved that ability for us to be able to go do that. Because before, we'd usually have to wrap a large supplier around a smaller one for us to feel comfortable with it, right? Now we don't necessarily have to do that. Was that what you were looking for? Something like that? Okay. Anything else?
Hi, I have a question. In terms of your DevOps process, where do you introduce security as a focus? And is this more of a passive, other than like scans, or is this more active? And what does that look like?
So the question is around how do we infuse security into DevOps?
Yeah, as a focus.
Okay. Yeah, so listen, I know there are a lot of folks who you know, like to say rugged DevOps. There are a lot of people who like to say DevSecOps, and you know, I could always add architecture, I could add test, I could create a word this long if I wanted to. And so just because security isn't in the word DevOps that we use, don't take that to mean anything. So, you know, basically what we do is we have a framework. So we have a CSO organization, we have a framework for what security should look like. We have basically processes that are required to be fulfilled, capabilities that are required to be fulfilled. We do that in the Scrum teams. So basically there are user stories associated with how a feature is delivered and what the security model is around that. Now, the more we can do around kind of isolating as microservices like role-based authentication and access and everything else, we'd like to move out, because then we can reuse it in multiple places. But we do that as part of the Scrum team. So that's in there on day one. Also, going back to the first gentleman's question, what do we do? AT&T also has an audit process that happens like every couple years on different systems. And we go through and we do audits for security, we do audits for compliance, role-based authentication, verify what's supposed to be done versus what's actually done, right? And so that's another thing that we do inside to make sure that that happens. I think I'm a little bit over. I'll just thank everyone. I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
like to thank Mr. Rice for taking time out of his busy schedule to join us today and providing those words. Thank you very much. At this point, the luncheon is over. We will meet back up at 1400 in the Sevco Symposium Room for Dr. Nielsen's Cyber Resiliency panel. Also take a moment to stop on the exhibit hall floor, get the ice cream break that's sponsored by American Systems today. Enjoy that, and we'll see you at 1400. Thank you.